think I'll roll another number for the road. I feel able to get on.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mark DiCarlo. Tonight, my guest is Mr. Kyle Holscher, a local attorney who I found out was the president of the Corpus Christi, Texas NORML, N-O-R-M-L. And that stands for what, Mr. Holscher?
The National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws.
Okay. Why do you want to reform marijuana laws?
Well, I think it's pretty clear at this point in the war on drugs that it's been a complete failure. That perhaps we don't need to be filling our jails with people who are just possessors of small amounts of marijuana. And I think that's where the movement is moving right now is to actually decriminalize.
What about big amounts of marijuana?
Well, honestly, in the two states that have legalized, large amounts of marijuana are no longer a problem. The idea of a large amount being somehow worse is fading away. But here in Texas, obviously that's a long way away. We're really just pushing towards moving marijuana to a less criminalized state.
How does Texas compare to the other states in terms of the penalties for marijuana?
Interestingly enough, besides a few cases, a few states, Texas has fairly liberal laws on marijuana, oddly enough, because here it's up to 2 ounces and you're still in a Class B misdemeanor. You got to have almost a QP before it's a state jail felony. And a state jail felony ranges all the way up to 5 pounds. So we're actually pretty light, but honestly, we'd like to move it so that, less than 1 ounce is no jail time. It's a ticket, a Class C misdemeanor. That would be, one of our
That's
first
what you're
goals.
moving to?
And it's been a part of the legislature for the last 4 sessions. Is a bill has been introduced to move marijuana less than 1 ounce down to a Class C misdemeanor. And it's really gaining some traction this year, I think.
The issue regarding the small amounts of marijuana is interesting because I don't know that they'll get to the small amounts of marijuana unless they bring over big amounts. Is that right? Or are you presupposing everybody's going to be growing marijuana plants on their own?
Well, no. Ideally, yeah, everyone could be growing it on their own. And small amounts do come from larger amounts. But the point is that when you catch, some 18-year-old kid with a joint, do we need to spend the money and time arresting him, jailing him, booking him, and prosecuting him when we could just be doing that through a municipal?
So does NORML suppose that it should be legal for somebody 18 to smoke a joint of marijuana, a cigarette of marijuana, but yet they can't legally drink, right?
Well, that is silly, but also the national consensus seems to be that the age for possessing marijuana should actually be 21. That's what it is in Colorado, and that's what it is in Washington. And most of the bills for legalization and the ballot initiatives have all set it at 21, trying to move it in line with alcohol.
And what does the Texas NORML want to do? Set it at 21 also?
Well, yeah, we'll probably once Texas gets to that point, which is a long way off. Legalization is not going to happen in this state for at least 10 years, and probably longer. But I have a feeling that that'll be sort of a national standard of just 21 at that point.
This battle has been carried on for a long time. In 1972, right? It was 72, McGovern campaigned on decriminalization of marijuana. I don't know if that was before your time.
Before I was alive, yes.
Okay, that's right. I followed that election pretty closely. So this issue's been kicked around for a long time, and as a matter of fact, recently a governor of California, Jerry Brown, came out and made some pretty radical not radical, but it got some, especially from a governor, Jerry Brown, who used to be referred to as Governor Moonbeam at one time. I don't know if that was probably before your time too.
I've heard it.
And as a matter of fact, I was told that he was responsible for medical marijuana or some legalization of marijuana in California. And now he's stating, according to the Washington Post, how many people can get stoned and still have a great state? Question mark. And quoting Jerry Brown, I'd really like those 2 states to show us how it's going to work, meaning Colorado and Washington, I assume. And the world's, quoting Mr. Governor Jerry Brown, the world's pretty dangerous, very competitive. I think we need to stay alert, if not 24-hour days, more than some of the potheads might be able to put together. So that's what Governor Jerry Brown says. What do you say about that?
Well, that statement is ridiculous in my mind. First of all, the preconception here on underlying that statement is that somehow if you smoke weed, you are going to be an underachiever. And if you smoke weed, you can't contribute what someone who doesn't smoke weed contributes. And that's kind of a myth that's been pushed through the war on drugs for a long time.
Yes.
But now that we've been able to actually research on large populations of marijuana users, we find that there's not exactly a big difference between a non-user and a user of marijuana in factual terms.
I have anecdotal experience, right? And unfortunately, that's what most of us don't have time to read as much as we like to anymore. But, I have personal experience. And I could tell you that the smartest person I ever met in my life, I went to law school with, and every day, I understood from his roommate, and I saw him do it. Every day after law school, he used to go smoke a marijuana joint. Yeah. Smartest guy I've ever met. But I think I know quite a few people. I think that marijuana ruined their lives.
Well, here's the thing, though, is that anecdotal evidence can prove anything. Okay, anecdotal evidence is not scientific evidence.
This is true.
But
so much of evidence that we have now, so much in the media is politicized that it's hard to get even. Everything is so politicized now. It's hard to get the bottom line on anything.
Well, that's true. Except that if you do dig into the facts, you can find them. Just because something's politicized, the truth, the factual evidence supersedes any spin you can put on something. And that's what's happening right now in the war on marijuana.
Well,
they're losing the war on marijuana because the facts are coming out so quickly.
I don't know about the facts, but you got the propaganda down. I mean, all over the media, I hear, how marijuana this, and right?
Well, and the thing is that the government's propaganda has cratered because the underlying reasons for the criminalization of marijuana were all based on lies. Every one of them. And so now, as actual facts come out and actual knowledge starts circulating amongst the populace, you see that no one's listening to that propaganda anymore. Is that no one's listening to the government's line because they realize that the government's been lying since they criminalized the plant. And so the facts are overwhelmingly positive for marijuana. And the more people know that, the more people accept marijuana legalization. And you see right now, national polls are over 50% of just full legalization in the U.S.
So you don't think that people get addicted to marijuana?
Oh, certainly some people get addicted to marijuana.
Because it seems, based again
just
on
like
personal
people
experience.
get addicted to chocolate and people get addicted to cigarettes and caffeine. And there's many things you can be addicted to. It's about, do we want those addicts in our criminal justice system? And that's not the proper place for them.
Well, in the federal system in particular, do you do much federal work?
I'm licensed in federal court, but I don't.
Okay. I always thought it was kind of funny when people think that it's so heinous that, Mexicans from Mexico were bringing over this marijuana, big truckloads. And to them, it's my impression, many of them, they just think, well, this is a commodity.
Yeah.
It's no different than bringing over whatever, avocados or lettuce or whatever. They don't think of it one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
They just think of it as a commodity. And I do obviously am concerned, and I think most of the people that do federal criminal law that defend these guys, we hate to lose these people to large number of years in prison.
Yeah.
So is there anything going on at the federal level to reduce these lengthy criminal sentences for many of these men are just paid, per load. I think they all are. I don't know for certain. They're not like independent people making all this money off the marijuana. They're paid per load.
Yeah, they're just employees of larger cartels,
right.
For sure. There are steps being done at the federal level, not regarding interstate transport, obviously, and even transport in general. They're still catching tons of people for marijuana. But what they're changing up is what they're prosecuting in states where they have legalized, which is really great because for a long time in California, there was the medical marijuana system in California is almost a de facto legalization.
Almost because
Because
I know
it's very
people.
lax
I
with
know people.
But to get back to your
I know
question.
people. Go ahead.
What they've started doing, or what they were doing in California, is there'd be these huge medical marijuana dispensaries, and the police, these are just low hanging fruit for the federal government. So they would just raid, every month, 20 different dispensaries would get raided across California. And it wasn't really a raid. You pretty much could just walk in there, and the guys would be like, okay, well, I guess I'm getting arrested. That's fine. But they changed it so that in Colorado and Washington, now, if you're operating under state law, your money is not being diverted to criminal cartels that are involved in other organized crime. If you are upfront with your taxes and upfront with your business, they're no longer arresting and no longer busting marijuana shops and recreational outlets. And that's a good sign.
You mean medicinal outlets?
No, in Washington and Colorado,
Oh, Washington
there are
and Colorado,
actual
of course,
stores
legal.
where
Yes,
you
certainly.
can go in and buy recreational marijuana.
Well, but I'm going to tell you again, a lot of my experience is anecdotal. I know some people that were smoking marijuana before they moved to California, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they like part of their whatever every day, right? Okay, I don't know what you think of smoking marijuana every day, but they're smoking every day. So then they move out there, and I got to hear from them how healthy. Oh, it's so good for you. Oh, it's medicine. Oh, it helps my back.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the truth of the matter is I mean, they were big potheads before
They knew any of that.
they knew any of that, and then that
They're
propaganda.
fair weather friends of marijuana.
Right. I mean, they like to smoke. I don't know why. I mean,
They were going to smoke whether it had medical benefits or not.
and right.
Okay.
So, and they call that recreational drug use, right?
Yeah. Just like
They like
last
to
night
smoke.
when I had a beer, recreational drug use. It's that regardless of whether alcohol has medical benefits or not, I'm going to drink it. There's a lot of people out there who think the same way on marijuana.
But one time, this is a funny story. One time I was in federal court. I won't. Well, what federal court it was, and the judge's name will be nameless. There was an attorney. He said, "Well, just because my client engages in recreational drug use," and the judge, man, started yelling, "Recreational drug use, recreational drug use. Don't you think that's a contradiction in terms?" He started yelling at him. That's one of the. Of course, it's always better to not be yelled at by a federal judge. But I remember that
I would
was
avoid it.
Yeah, that was a pretty funny story, I thought. So there are people, and I will tell you this. Yeah, I thought that was real funny because someone was getting yelled at. But you could see within this judge that they had a moral reprehension
Mm-hmm.
to drug use, that they thought it was antithetical maybe to a wholesome life, a dynamic life, whatever. So, whether or not they're right, they believe that. And
That's
there are a
correct.
certain number of people that believe that, right?
Mm-hmm. That is actually one of the driving factors that put us in the prohibition era that we're in right now, is people taking their own moral code and trying to enforce it through law enforcement. And that might be true. There are a lot of people out there who have moral opposition to marijuana use. Same thing, people have moral opposition to alcohol use. The question is it the proper place of the government to enforce the morals of a minority of the population?
I have heard that prohibition against alcohol, wherein couldn't buy or sell alcohol, was a success in one. I've only read this once. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. That it was a success and the number of alcoholics did go down. I don't know if that's true. Did you ever read that?
The problem with that information is that there's actually no reliable information, no statistical evidence of that, only anecdotal evidence of that, because they weren't tracking those sorts of things. They didn't have all the metrics that we have in modern times.
Oh, the computer.
And of course, the definition of an alcoholic is certainly different between 1915 and 2014. An alcoholic today drinks far less than an alcoholic in 1915 did. So There's not a standard for alcoholism, and there's no good reliable numbers on if alcoholics were reduced. Let me tell you one thing that prohibition did create is it did create our modern system of gangs. It did create our modern system of organized crime. It set up the same models that were set up during prohibition are what are used by our criminal gangs today to sell other street drugs. And so it also made gang violence and organized crime far more violent.
Well,
And so
I'm
I
not
think
gonna-
even if it reduced alcoholics, I think that the negatives that it'll put into our country are far worse.
But I think that I was very much surprised when the Soviet Union broke up with the amount of corruption that was revealed. And in retrospect, it was obvious why that was. Wherever in there's prohibited substances, wherever in there's controlled substances, obviously there's some sort of a gang or black market going to step in, right? So if you can't get like the gas stamps during World War II, I guess there's a big black market. There's a big black market for stamps to buy gasoline, etc. So so in some respects, I guess, and one could argue in a socialized state, you actually have more corruption than in a capitalistic state, if the goods are.
Absolutely.
So what I'm saying is, I'm not disagreeing with you, but just as an observation, I would say maybe whenever you have a controlled substance that people want, whether it's gambling or whatever, that you're going to have that kind of group come in.
You absolutely will. And that's an interesting thing about legalization as well, is that there have been some studies that have been done. I won't quote an exact number because I'll get it wrong, but about how much money has been now taken away from the Mexican cartels because of the legalization in Colorado and Washington. It's a significant amount because, and you got to think, this is, even if it's $100 million, and it was far more than that, but even if it's $100 million, it's $100 million less money being spent on guns, $100 million less money being sent up to big drug lords to destabilize the government of Mexico and the state governments of Mexico. That much less money to hire goons. This is a good thing, legalization, because it takes money out of the hands of those people who are willing to use violence to move their goods.
Why would one necessarily believe that the cartels couldn't get marijuana there as easily as they could where it was illegal? Why would one believe that?
Well, because prior, when it's in a completely illegal market, the people who are willing to break the law and set up organizations to break the law are going to have the most efficient product. They're going to have the shipment routes. They're going to have the growing fields. They're going to have the distribution network. And what happens with the legalization, we'll take Colorado as the example. Well, in Colorado now, you can grow your own plants. So it takes away their supply. They don't have that stranglehold on their market anymore. There's other people can sell with licenses at shops, so that takes away their distribution network. And people get a higher quality, a reliable product, a marketed product, a labeled product. And these are things that people want to pay money for. So they stop going to their local dealer and they start going to their local marijuana shop. And instead of that money going to the hands of a person who would send it down to Mexico to be used for violence, it's being spent on local communities to build schools and playgrounds. So it is undermining them big time. They are losing the markets. The Mexican cartels are, because there's a legal channel for their goods to be sold. So the illegal market disappears.
Well,
Not entirely, of
where's
course.
these small amounts of marijuana they're selling in Colorado and Washington? Where's it coming from?
It's coming from fields in Colorado.
So
and
there's people being farmers.
There are now
marijuana farmers in Colorado and Washington.
There are now legal marijuana farmers in Colorado and Washington, and in California too, and some other medical marijuana states. There's legal marijuana farmers on the state level.
Well, I know some guys in Northern California. They've been growing for a while, and I don't know, in that county, they don't arrest anyone for.
Most counties don't in Colorado, or sorry, in California.
Yeah.
Even though it's, there are some that have been taking a lot of action against people trying to grow marijuana. A lot of the counties realize that this is where their money is. They got a new cash crop, and the sheriff knows that.
Well,
the police departments know that, and they're not going to bust people even if they're going outside the law a little bit.
But money isn't everything either. Obviously, I hear this a lot about the medical marijuana, right? I hear, well, medical marijuana. Oh, and then the hemp for the growing, the hemp is such a good product for clothing, etc.
For lots of things.
And that by making it illegal, that's preventing the hemp growth, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But what about this? Let's say that there was no medical use for marijuana, and it was just, as they state, recreational use or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it's good to smoke marijuana? Is that a good thing?
I think it's neither good nor bad thing. I think it's a personal choice that people make, and whether you make that choice in yes or no, whatever you say to marijuana, you shouldn't go to jail for it.
Well, but you did tacitly admit that people do get addicted, and I'm sure you know. I've known people that smoked their whole lives, and I don't think it. I kind of thought it hurt them.
But do you have any data that backs that up besides the anecdote? Because if you actually track the data, it doesn't. There's a lot of people out there who smoke marijuana and have careers and have jobs and have families and they live a fine life, just like people who use alcohol.
I'm kind of more interested. I told you this, I think, when we spoke on the phone. I asked you to come on. Thank you very, very much. Again, this is Kyle Holster. Thank you for coming on to speak about NORML. I think it was the 60s, the electric Kool-Aid acid test was written by Wolf. Was his name Wolf, right? About Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters. Okay. And they were on the forefront of LSD, and they were on the forefront of marijuana usage. And what Ken Kesey said, Ken Kesey is the man who wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and he wrote Sometimes a Great Notion. And what he said was, well, look, we're trying these drugs, but we're becoming another culture that uses these drugs, the same as the regular culture. We're supposed to try these drugs, take what we can learn from them, and then move on to something else. That was that statement was made. Obviously, I read the book many years ago, and I hate to say it like this, but I've often thought that in my own mind, that trying marijuana may not be so bad, or obviously smoking it very infrequently may not be so bad, because maybe you could take something from it and you could learn it. But it becomes another lifestyle, and maybe not much to be said for it. Again, it's like drinking or anything else daily. Those are my thoughts. Have you ever considered what I'm saying, that maybe it's a drug that you could try it and then move on to the next thing, some other self-actualization or self-development in life?
Well, I suppose you could, but that would once again go back to a personal choice that you would make. If that's the way that you prefer to use marijuana, is some sort of discovery tool or something that may open up windows in your life that maybe were closed to you in your sober existence. I've had, many people have told me that that's been an experience with marijuana with them, is that it opened them up, I guess maybe philosophically, to new ideas. Yeah. But to say that then people have to quit, after they've tried it out, and that you're only allowed to experiment with it.
Well, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. I'm saying as a personal choice. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that. Just philosophically, I guess. I'm not supposing that you're allowed to experiment for a couple of years. I'm just saying that.
My personal philosophy on the subject is one of liberty. Is that that's something you can choose.
Talking about the ideas that you get when you're smoking marijuana, I think Waylon Jennings said, a lot of writers in that he knew, when they quit smoking marijuana, they developed writer's block. They didn't get those inflows of ideas that he got when...
So that reminds me of a great man, Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan is
I'm not a Sagan fan.
Well-known pothead. Okay, this is a man who smokes on the daily.
Well-known atheist.
When he was alive, of course. And he has a great quote. He said that we should legalize marijuana, tax it. With the tax money, we can build schools to help children explore new worlds, and through legalization, adults can smoke it and explore new worlds. And that was his philosophy on it. He said that many of his scientific breakthroughs that he's had in his life were directly related to his use of marijuana. Is that he wouldn't be able to have the
Well,
ideas that he had.
It's interesting. It's interesting that, excuse me for interrupting, that Carl Sagan was a big fan of marijuana. I'm not a fan of and I may be taking more in that. Obviously, I'm not. I'm kind of playing the devil advocate in many of our conversations.
Because
here.
everyone loves Carl Sagan.
No, I don't like Carl Sagan, and I don't like that. He opens up he opened up his Cosmos program. Something about the cosmos. That's all there is, was, or ever will be. Well, you know what? I was just having a conversation with my brother. I said, well, he's a pagan. He's worshiping the stars and the moon. I said, where's his drum? Beat your drum, Carl Sagan. I mean, you're engaging in, some sort of paganistic philosophy that is anti-Christian. And moreover, what's interesting is you're saying that when I'm saying that Carl Sagan is kind of a pagan. I think you could make an argument that within Western thought, marijuana doesn't necessarily fit in. I may have told you this too. I always thought it an interesting story. You're familiar with the Odyssey, Ulysses, Odysseus,
yes.
and and he's a man of adventure, and he travels, and he goes to one island, and one of the islands was the island of the lotus eaters, and they partake in the lotus leaf. I don't think that was actually marijuana, but it was a sedative drug, similar maybe.
Yeah.
And his people
many drugs.
became so enchanted by this drug that made them lazy. Those aren't the good words for being lazy, but lethargic and generally in a happy state, that I think he kidnapped some of his men to return to the boat, to again become men of adventure, to become men of travel and achieve. So in the Odyssey, I think they set up a dichotomy: the lotus eater versus the man of adventure and achievement. So, and I think that's a lot of the Western argument, a lot of the implied argument against marijuana, and that's what Jerry Brown said. How would you answer those? And there's a lot of issues.
Well, no, that's okay. So what you're saying is that, I guess, deep rooted in our Western culture is the idea that generally you should not be using drugs. And that's been true because there's been a lot, the church for a long time was very down on alcohol. Moralistic aspect of the war on prohibition.
The Protestant churches in particular, the Catholic churches less so, I would say, against alcohol.
And that might be true, but whether that's true or not, just because it has deep, cultural roots, the idea that using drugs is bad, does that mean that is true? Or is that just a part of our culture that has somehow been perverted and is kind of ruining our modern society?
Well, it seems like there's, look at the crime. I mean, and again, I've played devil's advocates. I'll be very frank, since I don't want to mislead people, my opinion. I've always been for the legalization of drugs, all of them. I said, well, where are we going? And I do criminal defense. I said, where are we going at with this? But I got to tell you, when Colorado, I told you this on the phone, in Washington, did legalize marijuana, I got a little scared. I said, well, I don't know. Are people going to be able to handle this? Are we going to have a lot of what Jerry Brown's concerned about,
Okay, and so, let's talk about that, because now there's actual information coming out from these states. There's so many states. I think we're up to 19 now with medical marijuana systems. We have 2 full legalization states. And frankly, 15 to 20% of the American population uses marijuana once a month. So,
I would have to agree that I'm sure that it's that much higher.
We're starting to have some great data on what happens when marijuana gets into the mainstream. And what we're finding out is that it's generally positive effects. It appears that drunk driving drops, DUID drops, teen marijuana use in medical marijuana states drops. The more liberal the program, the better the teen use drops. It's interesting. There's what was another thing? Oh, and of course in Colorado, for this first month, because the numbers for January came out a while back, and it appears that the first month Colorado pulled in $1 million in tax money a day from marijuana. You know, and this is money that goes directly into the local coffers.
You know,
And so,
speaking cynically, though, that sounds great. But speaking cynically, I wonder if they're going to cut taxes on anything. I doubt it. You know?
I hope
It seems
they
like
raise
the more
taxes on it.
I know, but I mean, I wonder if they're going to cut taxes on your property taxes.
Oh, hell
after
no.
No, they'll never do
No,
that.
the government loves money.
I mean,
But the thing is that I always say this and people laugh. I want the criminals in government to get that money rather than the criminals on the street. Okay? I will happily have all the drug money that's in this nation, and there's a lot of it, going directly to our state capitals, our city governments, rather than go to some guy on the street who doesn't care about law, who doesn't care if he has to break someone's kneecaps, doesn't care, you know, who he has to hurt or what he has to do, as long as he makes his money. You know, that's the guy I want to get cut out of the system, and legalization cuts that guy out of the system. And that's why we need to move towards that model, particularly in marijuana, where the argument's so strong because the drug, the negative side effects of the drug are so light.
you know, one thing that I really wasn't in favor of when I heard that they were taxing marijuana by 25% in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was. I'm not a big fan of the sin taxes on alcohol and or on cigarettes and or marijuana. I mean, I'll be very frank. I'm not. I think that what you can do is you can make these taxes so high that you could in fact make them kind of per se illegal. So, you know, per se illegal, and people have to do criminal acts to get them.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though, so I thought that was awful, that they would gouge
Well,
the marijuana users. I mean, look, even the same way with the cigarette smokers. I don't believe that's, you know.
I don't think
valid.
that's right either. But here's the thing with that. From field to dealer, marijuana's already going up by hundreds of percent, you know, as far as price goes. And so a 25% tax, I mean, that's kind of, I think, is even a low end of what that could be taxed and still maintain a legal market.
Well,
Obviously, if they tax it above the level of the illegal market will kick back in.
So how much? And I think that was going on for years with cigarettes, where an organized crime was transporting cigarettes from one part of the country
That's
to
huge
another.
in New York now.
It's still going on because of the taxes from one city to another, one state to another. So let's say you go into a marijuana shop in Colorado. How much is a bag of marijuana selling for? Like, I think it used to be a half ounce. I think years ago they called it a nickel bag. What does a half ounce of marijuana sell for? Do you know?
I think that it goes by, because what you're referring to, a half ounce, that's obviously a lower grade, older marijuana now. It's all high grade, hydroponic marijuana, whatever you want to call it. But an eighth is about $60. An eighth of an ounce.
An eighth of an ounce,
Yeah.
$60.
And
So how many joints could you roll out of a eighth of an ounce?
That's a good question. That's been a while since I bought an eighth of an ounce and rolled it up into a whole bunch of joints, so I couldn't answer that question very well.
Well, you know, we encourage law-abiding items on the show. So,
Well, it's
So-
like what, and this is also comes up too, is that this is the first question that I get asked, since I'm the face. You know, I'm trying to be the face of legalization here in
Yes, sir.
Corpus Christi. First question out of every
Here's the
person's
face.
mouth:
Mhm.
do you use marijuana? And the
I don't
answer
think-
is always this.
mm-hmm,
And this is the true answer, because it's very important. This is an important question.
mm-hmm.
Not anymore. Certainly when I was younger. Certainly a long time ago. And the thing is, though, is that when you want to be a frontman for an issue like this, where it is an illegal thing that you're advocating for, you have to let things like that go so that you can help other people.
If it's so great, then why aren't you smoking it?
Well, because like I said, I have to help other.
So if it were
users.
legal, then you think you might smoke it.
Absolutely. If
Okay.
if I could
But
go to
you're
the
a
corner
lawyer.
store and get it,
Mm-hmm.
I would use that on par with how I recreationally use alcohol.
Oh, I see. Well, that's very interesting that you've decided to give it up. So I guess for you at least, it wasn't too addictive.
No, and to 99% of users, it's not very addictive.
So here's another article. No, legalizing medical marijuana doesn't lead to crime according to actual crime stats.
Oh yeah, that was one that came out not too long ago. I read that one as well.
That's true.
Not surprising. Is why would making marijuana more legal cause more crime? How could that happen? It can't.
I don't know, by the way, in my criminal practice, I don't know that I ever really knew of anybody that committed crime to get marijuana. I think for some of the other drugs they would
Certainly,
steal
yeah.
and thief. I could honestly, again, that's anecdotal observation, right?
Well, and it's true on multiple levels. One, it's not as powerfully addicting, and this is not anecdotal. That's scientific compared to
No, of course not.
cocaine, heroin,
Crystal meth is big
crystal
now.
meth.
Yes.
These things are the things that will drive you to go break into someone's car so that you can steal something, so you can pawn it for $5, so that you can go get a $5 rock. Marijuana is not that sort of addiction. People,
No, and there's no
people who are addicted to it generally can maintain their addiction, you know, and it's just a $60 a week addiction, and you can just work a couple more hours, and you know.
And then I understand that. Let's say that there's no physical withdrawal, right?
Well, that's not true. All the studies that I've read looking into withdrawal symptoms of marijuana, there are very mild sleep-related, anxiety-related withdrawal symptoms. But obviously, you're not going to go to the hospital for these sorts of things. You're going to be on edge a little bit, kind of like quitting cigarettes. You're just going to be a little bit.
Well, certainly, if
Anxious
you ever tried to,
tired.
if you drink coffee and you've ever tried to quit drinking coffee, that could be very difficult too.
Yes, I would rank quitting coffee above quitting marijuana, because you get serious headaches after a coffee addiction. You try to quit it. I mean, even alcohol. You try to quit alcohol as an alcoholic, you can seriously go into detox and die.
Yes, that's my understanding.
You know, that's not something that can happen with marijuana. Marijuana actually doesn't even have a lethal limit of use.
One of the problems with, and this was in the 70s, I had read a Consumer Union's drug report and on various drugs, etc. And one of the things that they were very concerned about at that time, and they kind of predicted it, was that at one time, probably before your time, people would use like one drug, right? Now you and I represent people that are what's called polysubstance abusers. So they add these drugs on, and then they not only do marijuana, then they do alcohol, then they do, maybe crystal meth, and they do, so polysubstance abuse. So it is an issue, and it would seem like, I'm sure that you've represented many people besides doing marijuana. They did other things.
Oh, absolutely. That certainly is a concern. And I'm not sure that there is any scientific data that shows there's any more of it now than there ever was. But just pretending that maybe that is true.
Let's assume it's true.
What's the solution to that? Is the solution to that more prison time?
And this was a comprehensive report. I guess I was younger and I had an easier job, more time to concentrate. No, that wasn't I think that wasn't their approach at that time, that they foresaw this coming. I don't remember if it was somehow to encourage people to use one drug of choice.
And it might also be a matter of the drug market becoming more sophisticated. Is that perhaps in older times, the guy who was the drug dealer, he had a hookup for, let's say, cocaine. He could hook you up with cocaine. So guess what? All of his consumers are going to be cocaine-only users.
Right.
Now, you pretty much have drug dealers that are like Walmart. You can get anything you want. So you just tell your dealer, hey, well, I actually, I don't have any coke, but I do have meth. Would you like that? Sure. I do want a drug. Just give me a drug.
What about the argument that, and that's interesting, I can believe that's true. What about the argument that, well, look, we got enough problems with DWIs out there. Now you're going to have a problem with people smoking marijuana, intoxicated on marijuana, and I don't think they could really tell. I don't believe I've ever represented in all these years somebody busted for a DWI while intoxicated on marijuana. Have you?
I've never run into that myself, but that is an interesting aspect of it, and it's an important public safety aspect, because the legalization of marijuana is not about just making it so that anyone can just go into a store and get anything they want anytime they want. It's about what place do we want to move marijuana into our society. And what the decision is kind of becoming is we want to place it with alcohol. And the Washington legalization measure came with an attached piece of legislation that put a per se limit on, it's called DUID, driving under the influence of drugs. A DUID limit on marijuana, just like alcohol. Alcohol is 0.08. Now in Washington, it's it's 0.5 or 5 nanograms per milliliter of blood or something. I don't know what it is, but they put a
Right.
line on there because
So-
we need to
so-
start paying attention to, if we're going to accept marijuana into our society, we're going to have to put in other proper regulations to control how it's used and how it might endanger other people.
Can you test someone for marijuana?
Yes.
How do you test them? Is it got to be a
Generally,
drug test,
generally through urine or blood.
urine or blood? And of course, that's not nearly as convenient as the breath test.
Well, the breath test, as you might know, has its own problems.
But the blood test has its own problems too.
Sure does. But yeah, I mean, we don't have a perfect system yet. We're just trying to move towards one.
Well, so you don't think that the legalization of marijuana is going to cause more driving while intoxicated offenses or
No,
more
and
possible deaths on the road?
No, and there's actually some evidence of this that's coming out right now because people have been studying this in places where there was liberal medical marijuana laws, and now they're getting to study it in Colorado and Washington. And they're finding out that there's actually been a reduction in DUI. And I don't have the exact numbers, but it was an article that came out not too long ago when people were looking at these data sets, and they said, well, since the legalization of marijuana, or since marijuana has been legalized for medical use in a liberal situation, kind of a de facto like Colorado or California's set up, they've seen reductions in that, and I think there might be a factor of causes, but those would just be speculation for me to go down.
Does the normal group favor the legalization of any other sort of drugs besides
No.
marijuana?
We're a single issue group. Okay, we don't spend any dollar or time advocating for any other reform of any other drug law. They certainly, I'm sure most of our members would agree that the war on drugs is a failure, and we need to use a mental health model, a treatment model, rather than a prison model for dealing with drugs. But as far as we're operating, it's about marijuana. It's about marijuana laws. It's about educating people about how marijuana laws are negatively affecting our society and how marijuana laws could be changed in a safe way.
Here's one of your articles. Marijuana is one of your articles. It's online, and let me see. I guess it's norml.org.
Mm-hmm.
Marijuana is the third most popular recreational drug in America, behind alcohol and tobacco,
Mm-hmm.
and has been used by nearly 100 million Americans. 25 million Americans have smoked marijuana in the past year. More than 14 million do so regularly despite harsh laws.
Mm-hmm.
And our public policy should reflect this reality, not deny it. What is the reason that you think that they have dug in, the government, and made such a cause against keeping marijuana illegal? Is there a philosophical reason for it? Is there a practical reason for it? Or
For
are
the
they
government?
not? Yes. Why is the state and federal government taking such a philosophical stand against the legalization of marijuana?
Well,
Do you know?
I exactly know. It's for a variety of reasons. Number one, governments are not quick to change even when they're wrong. I mean, look how long it took for us to get over Jim Crow laws. Look at how long it took for us to get over the alcohol prohibition. And now it's going to take us a long time to get over this bad decision that we made a long time ago. There's also now armies of people in the government who get their money from the war on drugs. And there's this particularly comes up in California. California is a fantastic place to grow marijuana. That the federal government pays a lot of local law enforcement to go out and find marijuana fields. And so in all these little places across California, they're employing, a dozen officers on federal money for marijuana prohibition. And so, of course, they're not going to be for the legalization. Because when it gets legalized,
Right.
they lose their 12 officers.
Well, sure. Well, and the officers, the federal government pays pretty well. They probably make six figures.
And that's
Those
the other
agents
thing.
very may make $100,000 a
but I mean,
year
just
to go out
imagine.
there and look for marijuana. Okay.
Just imagine. I mean, think of the DEA. Now think of all of the directors in the DEA who all get money from that. All the investigators in the DEA who get money from it. It's all their paychecks. All the enforcers, all the little boots on the ground, the guys who do the raids. Okay, well, we got all those guys. Those are like your top tier guys. But what about the guys that supply those guys with weapons and armor and tanks to go after these marijuana users? Well, those guys, they got their finger in that pie too. And then what about the people who then run treatment centers for marijuana addiction?
Well, I mean,
when these kids are forced into treatment, those guys have their finger in that pie too.
Well,
they don't want legalization.
a lot of people think that most of the criminal defense lawyers I know, like myself, are in favor of legalization, even though it would.
Even though I would lose money, yes.
Yeah, you would lose money, and
I would happily lose that money in the interest of liberty.
I know it's sometimes, if you're not using marijuana and you're a judge, it's easy to be morally condemnatory of somebody who's doing something illegal. But the truth of the matter is you're getting paid to sentence him, and you're getting paid a lot of money sometimes. So, you wonder sometimes if it's not a little bit hypocritical.
Well, and here's the thing is that after we had a big show with our local normal chapter, I went back to the courthouse the next day, and I had just been on the news advocating for marijuana reform. So guess what the topic of conversation was that day with every person I ran into? And I had more than a few judges who pulled me aside and was like, "Hey, I saw you on the news. Good job. I'm glad what you're doing. You're doing a good thing." Just on the down low. They can't say it out loud because it's not to that point yet, but it's getting there. A lot of the judges do not like sentencing people for marijuana. They do not like going ahead. Prosecutors came up to me saying, "Yeah, that's great. I completely agree with you. I hate any time I have to do anything on a marijuana case because it's wrong." And I think that the opinions are getting out there. I don't think those people care as much about what it might cut into their paycheck. I think the people who are getting direct payouts, prisons, law enforcement, treatment centers, these are the people, drug testing places, these are the people getting their money directly from the prohibition, and they're the most staunch supporters of it. And this is why you see them immediately issue press releases anytime a legalization measure comes out, because they don't want it to happen. But luckily for my side, the facts are not on their side anymore. Is that everything that they're saying is based on myths and lies, and it's provable that they're myths and lies.
I'm not saying that I. There's certain things though that are. Willie Nelson is a primary advocate for marijuana, and he says that it's good for him.
Yeah,
it prevents him from. His family, I think he stated, had a history of problem with alcoholism, and and many of them died from alcoholism, and he didn't. He feels it's good for him from that perspective. From that perspective, but I'm not giving you a hard time, but I'd have a hard time. I mean, I'm probably for the legalization too, but I don't know. Do you really think marijuana does it do you any good? Really?
Well, that's the wrong question to ask, because does alcohol do you any good? I would
no. Well, I'll say something else about that. And I thought of this. I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine years ago, and his father had given him some sort of whiskey in a fancy bottle when he graduated from law school. And oh, son, this whiskey, man, I don't think I'd be giving my son a bottle of whiskey.
Well, and here's the thing.
I don't think so.
Yeah, and it's the great Homer Simpson quote: "Alcohol is the cause of and solution to all of the world's problems."
That's pretty good.
Marijuana's not quite to that point, and but it's not whether it's good or bad. You don't have to. Is a cheeseburger good or bad for people? Should we be regulating fat people eating cheeseburgers?
Well,
no, we shouldn't, because it's a choice you got to make, whether you're going to use alcohol or whether you're not, whether you're going to use marijuana or whether you're not, whether you're going to eat the cheeseburger or whether you're not. What we shouldn't be including in that decision-making process is whether to send these people to prison for that choice. Now,
well, I believe in government. I don't go for the right wing deal that we're not supposed to have a government. I don't know how you could run a business or a state without having a government.
Yeah.
You mentioned the cheeseburger thing. Well, maybe they shouldn't be illegal, but maybe they should put the calories on the cheeseburger
Agreed.
so you could read it. Maybe, you know what I mean? I think disclosure is better.
Just
I
like
think
there should
you
be
can be
labels on
misled by
marijuana.
mass marketing. I'm sorry?
Just like there should be labels on marijuana so that you know the product that you're buying instead of an illegal product from a guy in illegal product in a bag from a guy you don't know.
That's right. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if there was any ever statistics that indicated that people have been buying marijuana for years illegally. I don't know if is it adulterated in some manner. I mean, do we know? Is
Well,
there any studies on that? I don't know.
I don't think there's been any significant studies, although most adulterated scares, and this is one thing the government always talks about, is you never know what's in the weed, or you never know what's in the drugs. They could cut it with all these different things. Generally, that's a myth. Generally, when it actually does become true, it's a very small, one-off, weird situation where somebody puts sand in a bag of marijuana. And the truth is that that's not really a big thing. But you know what? I would rather somebody be responsible for telling me that this is a pure product. Is that when I go buy, water from the store, and I want to know that that is actually purified, clean water, and I want it to say ingredients, water, because I don't want to just buy a bottle. Oh yeah, we cleaned it, whatever. It's not tap. I want to know what's inside these products, and I want people who are out there buying marijuana, I want them to be safe too. I don't want those people who might put sand in it or might adulterate it to have the opportunity to.
As the in Washington or Colorado, who's overlooking the purity of the drugs and the labeling of the marijuana? Is it? I assume the Federal Drug Administration has nothing to do with it. In that
They have
state.
nothing to do with it. It's the power in both states, I think, went to the alcohol powers. Whoever controls alcohol is writing all the regulations for controlling marijuana. So whatever their alcohol bureaus are in those two states.
There's another issue that came out recently that I was reading about that was brought up, that there's a way, I'm no chemist, or I don't know how they do it, but there's a way that they're taking marijuana now and they're extracting, I guess, is it THC?
I'm talking about hash oil.
Yeah, they're extracting it, and it's much higher, I guess, whatever the hallucinatory effects, et cetera, and the concentration is much higher. And they're selling that in Colorado now, and now they're bringing up whether that's any issue. It looks like peanut brittle. I saw it on the internet.
Yeah,
or something.
it's referred to in a lot of different ways. It's called butter, honey, shatter, dabs.
So what does Normal have an opinion regarding whether or not that whatever synthesized or concentrated marijuana should be legalized? Also?
No, I don't think that the national opinion on such a thing is that there is no significant difference. The fact that you concentrate something doesn't make it bad all of a sudden. You're doing whole plant concentrations. It's you're getting everything in there. Even if you isolate different parts of it, why is that more bad than just the plant? I mean, that's like saying
Well,
we
it
shouldn't
might
have
have a
liquor,
different-
but beer's fine.
Well, it might have a different effect on you. If it's a difference between drinking, that's right, hard liquor or pure grain alcohol or something versus beer. It's a big difference, isn't there?
It certainly is a big difference, but you're drunk either way. I mean, the real difference is not that you have a higher concentration, so it's bad. That's a fallacious argument to make. It's certainly being used by law enforcement now. As you hear this all the time, the super weed. Oh, this is not the weed you grew up on. This is dangerous
Right.
now.
Right.
It's just a myth, man, because you were gonna be high either
So-
way with using it.
So, have you been to Colorado since it's been legalized and checked it out?
I have not.
Okay, it'd be curious to see. So, I'm walking, in the Padre Staples Mall or something, and they got a store,
Of course, it wouldn't be in Padres Staples
Why not?
Mall. Well, because
Was it restricted by zoning or what?
yeah, you have proper zoning requirements. Obviously, you would not want these things open near schools. You wouldn't want them open near playgrounds. These are things that you would want properly zoned, just like a liquor store,
Mhm.
just like
I
an
don't know.
adult.
Or liquor store? I drive down state. I see liquor stores all over. Are they zoned some way?
I think they do have zoning requirements.
Mhm.
I wouldn't know them off the top of my head, but I know they exist.
Okay.
Certainly, when you get your liquor license, Their zoning requirements on that is they won't give you a liquor license if you're right next to a school.
Oh, I see. So that's what you are in favor of those sort of reasonable regulations.
Yeah, you absolutely need reasonable
Okay.
regulations.
And is Normal in favor of, let's say that I would want to buy a pound of marijuana, like I buy a pound of butter or something. Are you in favor of limiting the amount of marijuana that one could buy in one of these stores?
I personally am not, and neither is the national normal. They have they think you should be able to own as much as you want. It makes no difference. You don't become a bad person going from 1 ounce to 1 pound. But obviously, in the public view, that's an important distinction. That's why a lot of the legalization measures and the decriminalization measure that we're hoping to push here in Texas is putting it down to 1 ounce. Under 1 ounce becomes a Class C, and it's about taking that step.
What
Moving
about
one more step closer to full legalization?
Okay, so in Colorado, you go into a store. I don't know if you could buy a joint. Say you could buy one joint.
Mhm.
So could you walk down the street smoking the joint?
Well, and here's something that I guess each individual state and community will probably be deciding over the next 20 years. Maybe. If you think that's fine in your community, then that's fine. Some will restrict public use. I'm not sure if there are restrictions of public use in Washington and Colorado. Off the top of my head, I can't think.
You don't
of it.
know. Okay, that'd be curious because even here, obviously, you're not allowed to
In
walk
New
down
York.
the street with a beer, right?
Well, that's true too.
Right.
Is that you shouldn't have an open container, be publicly
Mhm.
intoxicated. Those proper laws should be applied and expanded to marijuana the same way. But in New York, this is something that they have. Marijuana is decriminalized there. You cannot go to jail for possessing marijuana. What can you go to jail for? Public display of marijuana. And this is
That's interesting.
a trick that they use all the time because it's widely known that it's decriminalized. It's in your pocket, you're fine. A police officer cannot arrest you legally. So what does a police officer do? Oh, you have any marijuana on you? And the guy says, well, yeah, I know I can't go to jail. Of course I'm going to tell you that I have marijuana. Okay, well, let me see it. How much do you have on you? And so they pull it out. You're under arrest. Public display of marijuana. And so, those little
I wouldn't
nitpicky
be.
things like that.
I wouldn't be in favor of that. I mean,
I know,
that's
but
awful.
50,000 people a year, New York City go to jail for that very reason. So
Well, you said that you're in favor, obviously, that marijuana be basically enforced in many respects in the same way that alcohol is, public intoxication, etc. But you and I probably see a lot of abuse of the public intoxication laws here, don't we?
that's correct. Police officers do arrest anyone for any reason and then write public intoxication on there. And they wrote the law for that reason, to give police officers these powers. I don't agree with that, but that's something that we need to go to the legislature and change.
Well, there was a time I kind of saw the evolution. It used to be a lot harder to prove public intoxication, but there's been a series of cases making it easier and easier. Well, now any place is a public place.
Yeah.
It used to be wherein if it was restricted and the public wasn't likely to be there, it wouldn't be a public place, so you couldn't get busted. And then there was a string of cases saying that if you were a passenger in a car, that that was not a public place. I think those have all been abrogated to give the law enforcement more and more power to arrest you almost any time in any place for public intoxication. In a bar, for gosh sakes. I'm certain you've had clients who were arrested in a bar for public intoxication.
And this is actually one of the side effects of the war on drugs, is the expansion of the police powers of government.
Sure.
Is that first, we set our arbitrary goal to get rid of all drugs. And then we realized we couldn't do that. So how do we do it? Well, let's give the police more tools. Let's give them more resources. And let's give them the laws that they need to bust these people. And what it really comes out to is that it really just expanded the police officer's ability to arrest any person at any time for any reason.
Yes, and obviously, there's civil liberties are important. Many of us have been very disconcerted, especially the last 5 years, where it's escalated because of the alleged war on terrorism. And one could argue that it's actually been nothing more than, in many respects, it's resulted in a war on the American citizen.
Mm-hmm.
You could go through, when you go through a line in the airport, you feel that you're already under arrest. Some of the courthouses, you feel that you're under arrest. Some of the, various public places.
And that's certainly that's just an expansion once again of the war on drugs. Is that all of the anti-terror laws that have been passed, all of their uses have yielded almost no terrorist convictions. What they have yielded is a flood of drug convictions, because was the low-hanging fruit, and because it's really easy to bust people for drugs, because there's a lot of people out there using drugs. Just like it's very easy to bust people for marijuana, because there's a lot of marijuana users out there. I think we peaked, because now the legalization is kind of kicking in multiple states, but it peaked. We were arresting 900,000 people for marijuana a year in the United States.
Think I'll roll another number for the road. I feel